Good morning, Year 12. So I'm trying something different this week. This is a short lesson looking at the extract concerning Prince's death in chapter 4. And I'm going to take you through an analysis specifically focusing on Hardy's techniques and trying to draw out some of the significance of this passage. I will just read it first. So if you have got a paper copy of the book and you've got Penguin Classics, it's page 32, 33. If you haven't, it's in chapter 4. Okay, Tess and Abraham, her younger brother, have just been discussing whether Earth is a blighted star, and that all the stars they can see are planets, some good, some bad, blighted. And he says, is that really true? She says, yes. Is it like that really, Tess? Said Abraham, turning to her much impressed. On reconsideration of this rare information, how would it have been if we had pitched on a sound one? Well, father wouldn't have coughed and creeped about as he does, and wouldn't have got too tipsy to go this journey, and mother wouldn't have been always washing and never getting finished. And you would have been a rich lady ready-made, and not have to be made rich by marrying a gentleman. Oh, Aby, don't talk of that any more. Left to his reflections, Abraham soon grew drowsy. Tess was not skilful in the management of a horse, but she thought that she could take upon herself the entire conduct of the load for the present, and allow Abraham to go to sleep, if he wished to do so. She made him a nest of sorts in a sort of nest in front of the hives, in such a manner that he could not fall, and taking the rope reins in her own hands, jogged on as before. Prince required but slight attention, lacking energy for superfluous movements of any sort. With no longer a companion to distract her, Tess fell more deeply into reverie than ever, her back leaning against the hives. The mute procession past her of trees and hedges became attached to fantastic scenes outside reality, and the occasional heave of the wind became the sigh of some immense, sad soul, conterminous with the universe in space and with history in time. Then, examining the mesh of events in her own life, she seemed to see the vanity of her father's pride, the gentlemanly match awaiting herself in her mother's fancy, to see him as a grimacing personage, laughing at her poverty and her shrouded knightly ancestry. Everything grew more and more extravagant, and she no longer knew how time passed. A sudden jerk shook her in her seat, and Tess awoke from the sleep into which she, too, had fallen. They were a long way further on than when she had lost consciousness, and the wagon had stopped. A hollow groan, unlike anything she had ever heard in her life, came from the front, followed by a shout of "Hoy there!" The lantern hanging at her wagon had gone out, but another was shining in her face, much brighter than her own had been. Something terrible had happened. The harness was entangled with an object which blocked the way. In consternation, Tess jumped down and discovered the dreadful truth. The groan had proceeded from her father's poor horse Prince. The morning mail cart, with its two noiseless wheels, speeding along these lanes like an arrow, as it always did, had driven into her slow and unlighted equipage. The pointed shaft of the cart had entered the breast of the unhappy Prince like a sword, and from the wound his life's blood came spouting in a stream and falling with a hiss into the road. In her despair, Tess sprang forward and put her hand upon the hole, with the only result that she became splashed from face to skirt with crimson drops. Then she stood helplessly looking on. Prince also stood firm and motionless as long as he could, till he suddenly sank down in a heap. By this time the mail cart man had joined her, and began dragging and unharnessing the hot form of Prince. But he was already dead, and seeing that nothing more could be done immediately, the mail cart man returned to his own animal, which was uninjured. "You was on the wrong side," he said. "I am bound to go on with the mail bags, so the best thing for you to do is bide here with your load. I'll send somebody to help you as soon as I can. It will soon be daylight, and you have nothing to fear." He mounted and sped away, sped on his way, while Tess stood and waited. The atmosphere turned pale. The birds shook themselves and the hedges arose and twittered. The lane showed all its white features, and Tess showed hers, still whiter. The huge pool of blood in front of her was already assuming the iridescence of coagulation, and when the sun rose, a million prismatic hues was reflected from it. Prince lay alongside, still and stark, his eyes half open, the hole in his chest looking scarcely large enough to have let out all that had animated him. "'Tis all my doing, all mine!" the distracted girl cried, gazing intently at the spectacle. "No excuse for me, none. What will father and mother live on now? Abby, Abby!" She shook the child who had slept soundly through the whole disaster. "We can't go on with our load. Prince is killed." Okay, you can either print this passage, which I will attach to the PDF and make your own annotations, or simply read or print out the version that I'm going to save.